Simon & Schuster Audio presents Why We Want You to Be Rich by Donald J. Trump and Robert T. Kiyosaki, with Meredith McIver and Sharon Lechter. Donald Trump and Robert Kiyosaki are both concerned. Their concern is that the rich are getting richer, but America is getting poorer. Like the polar ice caps, the middle class is disappearing. America is becoming a two-class society. Soon you will be either rich or poor. Donald and Robert want you to be rich. Former Federal Reserve Chairman Alan Greenspan has said that the income gap between the rich and the rest of the U.S. population has become so wide and is growing so fast that it might eventually threaten the stability of democratic capitalism itself. What did the Federal Reserve Chairman state as the main cause of the problem? In one word, his answer was education. Mr. Greenspan points out that U.S. children test above the world average levels at the 4th grade level, but by the 12th grade level, they are far behind. He says, we have to do something to prevent that from happening. Donald Trump and Robert Kiyosaki also place the blame on the lack of education, but they focus on a different type of education, financial education. They point to this void in financial education as the primary cause for the United States plunge from being the richest country in the world to the biggest debtor nation in history. Both Donald Trump and Robert Kiyosaki are successful entrepreneurs and investors. Both men do business and are recognized internationally. Both men are also teachers. They teach because they are concerned about the fate of you and your family, this nation, and the world. As the Bible story goes, you can give a man a fish and feed him for a day, or teach him to fish and feed him for a lifetime. Instead of just writing checks to help the poor and middle class, Donald and Robert are teaching them to fish. When it comes to money, many people want to be told exactly what to do. They often ask specific questions, such as, I have $25,000. What should I do with it? When you tell people you do not know what to do with your money, they are happy to tell you what to do. And their recommendation is that you give your money to them. This book is not a how-to book. Donald and Robert will not be telling you what to invest in. They will share with you how they think, why they win financially, and how they see the world of money, business, and investing. Most rich people do not want you to know what they know or their secrets to becoming rich, but Donald and Robert are different. They want to share their knowledge with you. One of the definitions of leadership is vision. This book is about vision, about seeing what most people never see through the eyes of two men who have won, and occasionally lost, at the game of money. Why We Want You to Be Rich is a book about how these two men think and why they think the way they do. Through their eyes, you will gain additional insight into how you can improve your financial future. Chapter 1. Millionaire Meets Billionaire. Robert's View. Chicago, November 6, 2005.
It is early Sunday afternoon. Tens of thousands of people are attending a large real estate exposition put on by the Learning Annex in Chicago. The convention hall is filled with exhibits and displays of wealth-building investments and opportunities. In smaller classrooms, instructors are sharing their knowledge and wisdom about how the attendees can build their own personal fortunes. Backstage, in the large room where the production crews are working, there is a quiet, electric excitement. A long black limousine has pulled up, and people have begun to whisper, "He's here. Donald Trump has arrived." I am standing with my partner and co-author, Sharon Lechter, in the green room, a private lounge where the main speakers wait before going on stage. So I do not see the limo arrive. But when I see two police officers go past the door of the green room, I know Donald Trump is about to enter. I hurry out to make way for him and his approaching entourage. Standing outside the green room, I can see a tall, imposing figure stepping out of the limo. Those of us fortunate enough to have backstage passes spontaneously form two lines. Almost on cue, Donald Trump walks between the two lines of admirers, smiling and nodding. Bill Zanker, founder and CEO of the Learning Annex, greets Donald, shows him into the green room, and shuts the door. A moment later, Bill Zanker exits and walks over to me. "Are you ready to introduce Donald?" asked Bill. Rich Dad's Robert Kiyosaki, introducing the Donald. The crowd loves it. Donald Trump emerges from the green room and walks over to where Bill and I are standing. After a few private words with Bill, Donald turns to me and says, "Hello, you're introducing me?" I nod in response. "Great. I see you're still on the New York Times bestseller list," says Donald. "That's amazing." Then he lowers his voice just a notch. "I want to talk to you about something. Have you got time right now?" "Of course," I reply. "You're the #1 personal finance author, and I'm the #1 business author. We should do a book together. What do you think?" Stunned by the offer, I am speechless. "That's a great idea," Bill Zanker says, jumping in to fill the void caused by my silence. "It would definitely be a bestseller." Finally, I recover and feebly reply, "Great idea. Let's do it." Knowing that Donald doesn't care to shake hands, I risk extending my hand to see if he is serious about this book deal. He is, and we shake. Donald then turns to Keith, his imposing bodyguard, and says, "Give Robert my card. Call me the next time you're in New York, and we'll begin putting the book together," says Donald. "I'll introduce you to Meredith. She'll help us on the project." Flying home from Chicago to Phoenix, the reality of the handshake set in. Who am I to write a book with Donald Trump? I kept asking myself. And what would we write about? The subject of real estate popped into my head. With that thought, my personal critic chimed in and cynically asked, "You and Donald Trump write a book on real estate? When it comes to real estate, Donald Trump is in the major leagues, and you're in the little league. He builds skyscrapers in New York. And what do you own? A few apartment houses, a few low-rise commercial buildings, and some raw land? Besides, he's a billionaire, and you're only a millionaire." Suddenly, my successes and accomplishments seemed very small and inconsequential. Instead of feeling honored to be asked to write a book with Donald Trump, I felt miserable. What can we possibly write about? I asked myself over and over again as the plane flew from Chicago to Phoenix. 2 weeks later, Bill Zanker called from New York and asked, "Have you called Donald?" "No, I haven't," I replied. "Why not?" "Because I'm turning into a chicken," I said, and uttered a few chicken sounds. "Besides, what would we write about? His financial statement has a few more zeros in it than mine." "Oh, cut it out," said Bill. "You've sold over 26 million copies of your books. You're known all over the world. You've been on the New York Times bestseller list for 5 years. 5 years! Don't sell yourself short." "Yeah," I responded sheepishly. "But he still has more zeros and commas. His buildings are taller. What would we write about?" "Robert, just call Meredith and find out," Bill said kindly. "Just talk to her. She's waiting for your call, so call her now." Okay, I replied. "I'll call her right now." Before I could lose my nerve, I hung up with Bill and dialed Meredith's number. "Hello, this is Meredith McIver." And this book was born. On December 12, 2005, I was in New York to record a television program for PBS and to meet with Yahoo Finance. Since I was to be in New York anyway, Meredith and I had agreed to meet to see if we could find the perfect book concept. On December 12th, my wife, Kim, and I took a cab to Donald Trump's office. Those of you who have seen The Apprentice are probably familiar with the gilded entrance to Trump Tower on New York City's famous Fifth Avenue. Standing on the sidewalk like a country bumpkin, I leaned back and let my gaze climb the heights, story after story, until my eyes finally found the point where the building and the sky met. I remembered looking up at buildings like this when I first came to New York to start school at the Merchant Marine Academy in 1965. I was a poor Hawaiian kid in the big city for the first time, and I was definitely not allowed into buildings like this one. And here I was, 40 years later, invited by Donald Trump to his office and his building. Taking a deep breath, I entered Trump Tower with Kim and proceeded to the elevators where security guards greeted us. Once cleared, we entered the elevator and rode it to one of the top floors where Donald runs his empire. The first person to greet us, once the receptionist had us take a seat, was Keith, Donald Trump's giant bodyguard. When he saw us, Keith took the time to greet us warmly, as if we were old friends. He sat down next to us and made us feel completely at home. He stayed with us, offered us water, and kept us company until the door to the main office opened and Meredith walked in. Meredith is the classic young New York City executive woman, an attractive woman who would be perfectly at home in London, Paris, Sydney, Tokyo, Toronto, or Beijing. She extended her hand and offered us a warm smile as she said, "Great to finally meet you." After thanking Keith for his graciousness, Kim and I followed Meredith through the glass doors and into the boardroom. After a few minutes of chatting, Meredith asked, "What would you like to write about?" "Well, I'm concerned about how the rich are getting richer, but America as a nation gets poorer. We could write about the demise of the middle class and the poor, how high-paying jobs are being exported to China and India. I've also been concerned for a long time about pensions disappearing and Social Security and Medicare going broke just as baby boomers begin to retire." "Mr. Trump is also very concerned about those issues," Meredith said. "He wrote a great book about it." "The America We Deserve," Kim said. "Yes," replied Meredith. "He wrote about his concern with those issues as well as the threat of terrorist attacks, even before the attack on September 11th. Anyone concerned with our current global problems and how to solve them should read his book." "So we definitely have some issues in common. You know, we met at the Learning Annex. We have both been teachers for that organization for years. I've been curious about why he teaches, but we're both always in such a hurry I never get a chance to ask him." "He's a natural teacher," Meredith said. "I've seen that over the years working for him. Just look at The Apprentice. When Mark Burnett proposed the idea for the show to him, Mr. Trump insisted the show have educational value, or he wouldn't do it." "Well, maybe the angle of this book is that you are both teachers," Kim chimed in. "After all, you both are entrepreneurs and real estate investors. Lots of people know that, just like they know about Trump Tower and Trump Place. But they don't know the two of you are teachers." Meredith smiled and nodded. "In spite of your financial challenges, you have both been very public about your successes as well as your failures. Tell me, why have you been so open about your financial troubles?" "Because I want people to know it's how I learned so much. I want people to know that rich or poor, we all have financial problems," I answered. "Exactly. Mr. Trump is the same. He truly wants people to learn. That's why he shares his wins as well as his losses. Which is where you and Mr. Trump are different from other rich people," smiled Meredith. Suddenly, there was a knock on the door. It was Rona, Donald's personal assistant. She said, "Mr. Trump will see you in 5 minutes, and he apologizes for the delay. He hates to keep people waiting, but he was tied up on a phone call." "Not a problem," I said. "The extra time with Meredith has been useful." "Welcome," Donald Trump said, standing up from behind his desk. "My apologies for keeping you waiting." "Not a problem," I replied as I looked around his office, noticing all the awards and plaques and presents from people all over the world. Beside his desk was the radio equipment he uses for his weekly radio show. It was all very impressive. After the usual pleasantries, we got around to why we were meeting in the first place. "So what should our book be about?" asked Donald. "I believe we've all had the same question," I replied. "Since there is such a wide gap between our respective real estate dealings as well as the size of our respective financial statements, I don't think we match when it comes to money. After all, you're a billionaire and I'm a mere millionaire." Donald chuckled. "Don't ever put down being a millionaire. Billions of people would love to trade places with you financially." "I realize that. But there is a definite difference between millions and billions. After all, today there are many millionaires who are actually broke." "What do you mean exactly?" asked Donald. "Well, we all know people whose homes have increased in value, but their incomes have not. For example, I have a classmate from Hawaii who inherited his parents' home after they died. Since the real estate prices have skyrocketed and the house has no debt on it, he is technically a net worth millionaire. But he and his wife still struggle financially because they earn less than $90,000 a year. They have 3 kids in school and are struggling to figure out how to afford their college educations. So they are asset-rich and cash-poor, said Donald. Yes. If one of them or their children becomes ill, they could easily slip into poverty. That does happen to a lot of people, especially after they retire and stop working. They have to sell everything if they become ill, just to survive, added Donald with a somber tone. And the problem will grow as the baby boom generation retires in a few years. Yes, I know, said Donald. Even more than Social Security, Medicare is the biggest debt our nation bears. I don't know how we will afford to pay for 75 million new retirees, their health care, their medicine, and their long-term care once they grow really old. I worry about my kids' generation and how they will afford to pay for our generation's financial dependence upon our government. Maybe that is what we should write about, I said. Well, I already did write about it in The America We Deserve, though it never got the readership I would have liked. I think it was my best book because it was about the problems we face, not just about getting rich. But it didn't sell nearly as many copies as my other books. I had one of those books too, I said. It was Rich Dad's Prophecy, released in 2002. It's about the demise of the stock market when baby boomers retire and the inadequacies of our 401k plans. It's also about how a lot of workers will lose their pensions and retirement in the near future. And it didn't sell either? Asked Donald. No. Like your book, many people said it was my best book, yet it didn't sell like it. But even worse was the Wall Street publications that didn't believe my predictions. Donald nodded. You and I have been concerned about many of the same things. It seems that way. That's why I teach, write, and create board games. I believe our country is in trouble, and so are millions of our people. Donald agreed. When we speak to those thousands of people at the Learning Annex events, don't you feel for those people? Here they are, spending time and money to listen to us. While some are already rich, and some will become rich, many will face lives of constant financial struggle. That breaks my heart. Maybe this is what you need to write about, said Meredith. Maybe people need to know why you want them to be rich, what your concerns are. Maybe we should write a book about ending poverty through financial education, I said. After all, it is the lack of financial education that got us into this mess. Why not let financial education get us out? Great idea. But we need to let people know how to save themselves before we attempt to end poverty on a global scale, which may take generations. We need to do that first, before we can hope to change the education system. He continued. In just a few years, millions of baby boomers will retire. The government will have to admit it is out of money. The price of oil is going through the roof. Our dollar is dropping in value. Inflation is out of control. And we are still at war in the Middle East. We need to have some answers for those who are searching for answers now. We need to teach people to be rich, or at least how to survive the next few years, today, not tomorrow. At that moment, I knew why we were coming together to write a book.
Donald's view. The beginning.
The first time I met Robert Kiyosaki was one of those big surprises that life likes to give us now and then. I knew of Robert's credentials, namely having sold millions of books and remaining on the New York Times bestseller list for 5 years. These are no simple accomplishments. I expected him to be a powerhouse, and an intimidating one at that. I was right about the powerhouse prediction. Robert has positive energy that spills out and touches everyone around him. He doesn't seem to be making an effort to do this. It's just a natural occurrence. I was impressed by that. What I found disarming about Robert was that he was very humble, very modest, even self-effacing. This was the guy who has sold over 26 million books? Amazing. I was wondering to myself if that was an act, a facade, a role he played for some reason. I can be skeptical sometimes. It didn't take me long to figure out that Robert was genuine. After we spoke a few times, I knew he was sincere and that he enjoyed teaching, probably as much as I do. It was like I told him at the Learning Annex in Chicago. I was the top business author, and he was the top personal finance author. Together, we had a great shot at reaching millions of people. But more than that, it would be fun. Robert got what I meant immediately. but I appreciated that he wanted to think about the book before committing to me. I knew he was a thoughtful person, that he would do a lot of soul-searching in order to make the right decision. When he met with me at my office in New York a few weeks later, he said right off the bat, "I have to admit I was a little intimidated at first. It was like an inner fight going on. I didn't know if we had enough in common. But the best person won, the one who refuses complacency." Robert was honest with himself and me, and it confirmed for me why his books have been such monster hits. When I read Rich Dad, Poor Dad years ago, before I ever met Robert, I remember thinking that Robert had a knack for making things easy to comprehend. He's a bit of a storyteller, and that's one of the keys to making things accessible to people. I will admit that people I know were surprised to hear I was going to collaborate with another entrepreneur to write a book. Entrepreneurs very much like being in control, and sharing the control is not high on our list of desirable situations. But when you meet someone who is on the same wavelength in so many ways, it becomes a pleasure. Joining forces makes us stronger, not weaker. What has evolved in this process took on a life of its own, and it became more than just another book with a proper outline. It has become a living example of what we worked on and lived through together from our initial meeting to the day we finished our first draft. It quickly became a joint effort to provide financial education to anyone seeking a better life at a time when we all need to be financially equipped for the future we face. This book is for anyone who wants to move forward and get out of their comfort zone. You may be a millionaire already, or maybe not yet, but the lessons here can apply to everyone, no matter what your current financial circumstances might be. I hope you'll see the process as one from which you can learn while being entertained. There's nothing boring about business, which you are soon to discover. Robert and I have another thing in common. Neither of us likes to be bored. We like to get things done. So pay attention, keep your focus, and enjoy yourself. Why We Want You to Be Rich, 2 Men, 1 Message, has a lot to offer. Tune in and stay tuned.
Chapter 2. Our Shared Concerns. Robert's View. Dallas, Texas, February 19, 2006.
Once again on Sunday afternoon, the black limo pulls up to the backstage entrance of the Learning Annex's Real Estate Expo. Once again, the excitement builds as word spreads that Donald is here. And once again, the police escort comes in first to clear the way. 2 lines form, and Mr. Trump walks the gauntlet of adoring fans. After about an hour, after the press has left, Donald asks me, "How big is the audience, and how are they?" Tens of thousands in attendance, and they're a great group. People have come from all over the world to be here this weekend. They're very excited about learning and hungry for knowledge. I was excited too, but for different reasons. Since our last meeting, I had read Donald's book, The America We Deserve. The book addresses many of the problems we face as a nation and as a world, such as terrorism, the national debt, and healthcare. Here's an excerpt from his chapter on the healthcare issue. He writes, "Unlike Social Security, Medicare's HI program has been experiencing a cash flow deficit since 1992. Current payroll taxes and other revenues have been insufficient to cover benefit payments and program expenses. In essence, Medicare has already crossed the point where it is a net claimant on the Treasury, a threshold that Social Security is not expected to reach until 2013. The current Medicare program is both economically and fiscally unsustainable. This is not a new message. The Medicare trustees noted in the early 1990s that the program is unsustainable in its present form. There's one more aspect of the medical insurance story that is almost totally off the typical radar screen. This one involves long-term care. With the baby boom generation heading toward retirement and their parents already there, this is a huge issue. Nearly 1 in 2 Americans will need some type of long-term care, but only 1 in 4 can afford long-term private nursing home care, which now averages $41,000 in $1999 a year. Only 1% of Americans have bought long-term health care insurance, so most are hoping to rely on Medicaid. As things are right now, they're in for a major disappointment. After a short initial contribution, Medicaid will drop out of the picture until the patient's resources are spent down to the poverty level. If the patients are your parents, that means everything they've worked for in life will be gone. It can also create a massive financial burden on families. The boomer who planned to sail around the world on his own boat might find himself selling his car to keep mom or dad in a decent facility. Once I read The America We Deserve, I knew, without a doubt, what our shared concerns were, why we were teachers, and why we wanted people to be rich. In the green room, that day in Dallas, I drew a diagram that showed Social Security with $10 trillion in liabilities and Medicare with $62 trillion in liabilities. "You're saying it's $72 trillion in off-balance sheet obligations?" asked Donald. "Says who?" "Two economists," I replied. In 1994, Kent Smetters and Jagadish Gokhale painstakingly spent the time to compute how much, as of 1994, our government's obligations to the American people were. "That's a lot of money," said Donald. "That's more money than all the money in all the bond and stock markets in the world," I said. "I knew it was bad," said Donald, "but not this bad. We can't pay it." "Only if we print more money, which would wipe out the savings of everyone. One possibility is hyperinflation, but that wouldn't really solve the problem. Not only would savings be wiped out, people on fixed incomes would also be wiped out." "I'm afraid we have developed an entitlement mentality as a nation," Donald said. "And I'm not talking about just poor people. Too many people, from the president and senators on down, expect a pension from the government. I really wish we could afford to solve their problems, but to do that would bankrupt our nation." I agreed. Donald and I want people to let go of the entitlement mentality and become rich so they can solve the problem, their own problem. The best way to solve the problem of bad financial results is to change our thoughts, to start thinking like rich people rather than poor and middle-class people. That means losing the entitlement mentality, whether you are a military officer, government worker, school teacher, employee, or just poor. If we do not stop expecting the government to take care of us, we will continue to have the same results: a bankrupt nation filled with well-educated but financially needy people. Albert Einstein defined insanity as doing the same thing over and over again and expecting different results. In this case, it is my opinion that it is insane to keep sending kids to school and not teaching them about money. Instead of walking away with a solid financial education, most kids leave school, some already deeply in debt, prepared only to work hard, save money, get out of debt, invest for the long term, and diversify. Here's what Warren Buffett says about diversification. "Diversification is protection against ignorance. It makes very little sense if you know what you are doing." One of the keys to becoming rich is to know what you are doing.
Donald's view. Groupthink.
I guess we all probably heard the term groupthink by now. It's an old herd mentality that seems to bring out the best and the worst in people. By the best, I mean that sometimes a shepherd will surface. But that's an unlikely scenario. It's usually the wolves that will surface first, and the herd will be primed and ready to follow. What we're trying to do here is break up the herd before we are incapable of seeing, hearing, thinking, and doing for ourselves. People who are capable of thinking for themselves will rarely be part of any herd. While we are focused on the groupthink that keeps people from thinking for themselves financially and has them blindly turning their money over to financial advisors, it reminds me of another story. For my radio program on Clear Channel, I decided to speak about Object Orange, which is something happening in Detroit, Michigan. Detroit has a problem with ramshackle, empty homes because the city has lost nearly 1 million people in the last 50 years. A group of artists in the city was tired of looking at the vacant, dilapidated buildings around town, so they decided to do something about it. To call attention to the abandoned buildings, the artists secretly painted the eyesores bright orange overnight. Because it's hard to miss a bright orange, rundown building, several of the houses have since been torn down, which was the goal in the first place. The artists are remaining anonymous, because obviously they could get in trouble for trespassing. They are also hoping other renegades with paintbrushes will join their project. This is a great example of people taking action and accomplishing something. They took matters into their own hands instead of waiting for someone else to do something about it. It's unconventional, but it seems to be working. It's an overused term at this point, but out-of-the-box thinking is obviously alive and well, certainly in Detroit. Artists aren't the only people around who have the right to exercise that part of the brain. We all do. Let's try to start thinking like that no matter where we live or what we do. The worst thing for us, individually and as a nation, is to become passive observers or to slowly sink into our comfort zones. Robert and I want you to expand your thinking. We can all benefit from the wisdom of Descartes. I think, therefore I am. Think bigger.
Chapter 3. The Shrinking Middle Class. Robert's View. Raising Your Financial IQ.
There are many definitions of intelligence. One of the more practical ones I learned from my rich dad, who is actually the father of my best friend. He told me, intelligence is the ability to solve problems. When it comes to money, the bigger financial problems you can solve, the higher your financial intelligence. Today, our world faces some serious financial problems. Many are interrelated problems, one causing the other. Some of the more pressing ones are 1. Value of the dollar falling. 2. National debt increasing. 3. Baby boomers starting to retire. 4. Oil prices rising. 5. Gap increasing between the rich and everyone else. 6. Wages decreasing. 7. Jobs being exported. 8. Social Security and Medicare going bankrupt. 9. Savings being wiped out. 10. Lack of financial education. The pressing questions are 1. What can we do? 2. What are the solutions to these problems? 3. Is our financial IQ high enough to solve these problems? 4. How do we avoid becoming victims of these problems? 5. How do we protect our families from falling victim to these problems? Many of today's financial problems exist because we did not solve the problems when they first arose. Rather than increasing the financial IQ of the population, we taught people to expect the government to solve their personal problems for them. This is why no politician dares touch Social Security and Medicare, even though most of us know these programs are doomed. Now, I can hear some of you readers saying, we need to take care of those who cannot care for themselves, and I agree with that. We, as a civilized society, should take care of those who cannot take care of themselves. However, most of us can take care of ourselves if we have to, and if we have been trained to. It's time to raise our financial IQ. In my conversations with Donald Trump, we agreed that we cannot solve today's complex financial challenges with yesterday's financial intelligence. If we as a nation attempt to solve Social Security and Medicare by giving people more entitlement payouts, the golden goose will be cooked and eaten, and there will be no more golden eggs. Simply said, America is on its way to becoming a well-educated nation of rich people and poor people. The middle class is becoming extinct. The problem is our nation is filled with people like my poor dad, a good man, well-educated, hardworking, yet expecting the government to take care of him when he retired. In a few years, the first of approximately 75 million baby boomers will begin to retire. This is the first generation that has contributed fully to Social Security and Medicare. The problem is, the money they contributed is gone, disappeared into a Ponzi scheme. There are two more problems. Since we do not teach much about money in schools, many of those 75 million do not know what a Ponzi scheme is. Secondly, since most did contribute fully, they deserve to be paid. But if each of the 75 million baby boomers begins to collect just $1,000 a month in Social Security and Medicare benefits, the total added to the U.S. government's payroll is $75 billion a month. This is similar to the cost of one Hurricane Katrina or one Iraq war every month. The good news is you still have time to prepare and avoid becoming a victim of the coming financial hurricanes. But not much time. In Sunday school, I was taught, give a person a fish and you feed him for a day. And that is what we as a nation have been doing. This is the entitlement mentality of Social Security and Medicare. Teach a person to fish and you feed him for life. This is what Donald and I have been doing. We want people to learn to be rich and teach others to be rich. In Teach to Be Rich, I talk about how some people do not want to give people fish or teach others to fish. Instead, they sell people fish. Many of these people are stockbrokers, real estate brokers, financial planners, bankers, and insurance agents. When you put the two words sell and fish together, you get the word selfish. And even though most people in the business may not be selfish, enough are to make the word ring true. I use it here to emphasize the importance of staying on your guard, to be aware of the differences between those who give, the teachers, and those who sell. Donald and I are concerned that most people do not choose to learn to manage their own money or learn to invest their own money. Instead of learn, they simply turn their money over to experts and then hope and pray their experts are truly experts. Donald Trump and I do not sell fish. We do not sell investment advice or tell people what to invest in. We are teachers. We want you to learn how to become rich, invest your own money, and become your own financial expert. We want to teach you to fish for yourself. We want to encourage you to become rich because America and many other countries are becoming two-class societies, rich or poor, classes or masses. One reason, if you do not decide to become rich, the chances are you will become poor. In Western nations, the middle class is disappearing, slowly, surely, and catastrophically. If you want to remain in the middle class, you may need to consider living in China or India. Rather than squeezing out their middle classes, China and India are growing their middle classes. In America and other Western nations, however, the choice is becoming limited to be rich or be poor. However, people in China and India's middle class often aren't living any better than many American poor people. So you might as well decide to get rich in America.
Donald's view. The shrinking middle class.
When Robin and I were talking about the shrinking middle class, it made me aware that some things can be explained. It's like an hourglass, with the middle class, the pinched part, or like someone with a very small waistline. What happens when you flip the hourglass? Either way you flip it, you have the poor feeding the rich, or the rich feeding the poor. It's either one or the other. I don't like that visual because it reminds me of the old world and aristocratic ways that America revolted against. Are we headed back that way? Were the colonists just a bunch of misguided idealists to begin with? Our country has been a superpower for a short amount of time, if you look at the history of the world. The biggest risk we have now is not being prepared for the future. As we have seen, there are no guarantees, but being ready sure beats being taken by surprise. During World War I, at the Battle of Gallipoli, no one expected 250,000 soldiers to be killed, or for the combined British, Australian, New Zealand, and French operations to be defeated and repelled by the Turks. It came as a big surprise to them, because they didn't know what they were getting into. Globalization is a fact of life in today's environment. As Robert described China and India as growing economies we must watch, I simply smiled, as once again we have been thinking alike. Many people think it will take years for China and/or India to approach America's position as the largest economic power. But this may be yet another example of groupthink in process. Both Robert and I have seen their global impact already. Recently, I was talking to a friend who lives in Europe, and he mentioned the huge amount of coverage China gets over there, compared with what we have about it in the United States. It's a very big topic there. There are 2 facts alone about China that will indicate how that country is doing and where that country is going. 1. The first Starbucks opened in China 2 years ago. There are now more Starbucks in China than in the United States. 2. In the 1970s, Shanghai had exactly 1 skyscraper. It now has close to 800. Those are just 2 examples, yet easily visualized examples that should bring something home. China is a big force. Its population is such that 1 in every 5 people on the entire planet is Chinese. China has a vibrant economy and workforce and has adapted very well to the new technology. The Chinese are industrious and disciplined. What does this mean? We can either close our eyes and be blown aside, or we can study China and position ourselves to benefit from the changes. My 2 eldest children, Don Jr. and Ivanka, who work at the Trump Organization, were in India recently, so I decided to do some research of my own. Here are a few facts I found. India is the world's largest, oldest continuous civilization. In the last 10,000 years, India has never invaded any country. India is the world's largest democracy. India is one of the few countries in the world that gained independence without violence. The art of navigation was born in the river Sindh 6,000 years ago. Sanskrit is the mother of all the European languages. India was the richest country on earth until the 17th century when the British invaded. Chess was invented in India. India invented the number system. Albert Einstein said, "We owe a lot to the Indians, who taught us how to count, without which no worthwhile scientific discovery could have been made." Algebra, trigonometry, and calculus originated in India. The value of pi was first calculated by the mathematician Buddhayana, and he explained the concept of what is known as the Pythagorean theorem. He discovered it in the 6th century, which was long before European mathematicians. India is the largest English-speaking nation in the world. My point is that India is definitely worth looking into and knowing something about. Plus, 38% of doctors in the United States are of Indian descent, and 12% of scientists are as well. They represent the wealthiest of all ethnic groups in the United States as well as globally. Education is stressed, and many Indians run large U.S. and global corporations. India itself has become a major economic force on its own once again and deserves our attention, not just as a destination point or a piece of history. India is important to our future, and as globally aware citizens, we need to spend some time learning about this fascinating and dynamic country. And consider this: how can you use this information to your advantage? The rich will spot the opportunities, while the poor will hide their heads and pretend it isn't happening. Can you spot opportunities that may arise from these economic changes?
Chapter 4. How to Make Yourself Rich. Robert's view. Solve problems.
Everyone has money problems. If you want to make yourself rich, solve problems. Identifying a problem creates the opportunity for creating a solution. Every generation will have its own unique set of financial problems. For my parents' generation, their challenges included a depression and a world war. Their solution to those problems was to go to school, get a safe and secure job with benefits, retire at 65, and play golf for the rest of their lives. Many of the World War II generation had a defined benefit pension plan, savings, Social Security, and Medicare. For many of my parents' generation, a good education and a good job were adequate for financial survival. My generation, the baby boom generation, faces a set of different financial problems. Today, a good college education and a good job are not enough. To make matters worse, jobs are being exported overseas. Today, fewer and fewer companies have defined benefit pension plans. Because defined benefit pension plans are so expensive, companies that do have them are starting to alter them or discontinue them simply to save money. Companies do not want to pay for employees for life. In 1974, due to the changing global markets, many companies stopped offering defined benefit, DB plans, and began offering defined contribution, DC plans. which later became known in the United States as 401k, IRA, and Keogh plans. My generation's problem is that a DB plan is a true pension plan, and a DC plan is not a true pension plan. It is a savings plan. In very simple terms, a defined benefit plan will cover you for as long as you live. A defined contribution plan will cover you only as long as there is money in your account. In other words, a DB plan, in theory, will not run out of money, while a DC plan can run out of money. That may be why USA Today found that the greatest fear in America today is running out of money during retirement. Most of us already know that up to 80% of the baby boom generation does not have enough wealth to fall back on. The generations following the baby boom generation, often called Generation X and Generation Y, will have a different set of financial problems to handle. If the baby boom generation does not do a good job cleaning up the mess left by its parents, there will be an even bigger mess for Generation X and Generation Y to handle. Generation X and Y will not only have to handle their own financial problems and the debts of our country, the biggest debt in the history of the world, they will also inherit their baby boomer parents' financial problems, and maybe even their grandparents' problems, since we are all expected to live longer. By living longer, we may expect to extend our working years by retiring later. But what if we live longer and are not able to continue working? The growing size of this problem, now in the trillions of dollars, is daunting. Merely pushing it forward onto the next generation just makes the problem bigger and more complex. The bigger and more complex the financial problems become, the higher the financial IQ is required to handle the problems. We're going to need all the brainpower we can get to solve this problem. Worst of all, the lack of financial education in our schools makes it easy for unscrupulous people, even elected officials from both parties, to legally steal from the unsuspecting. So the problem compounds itself. Donald and I hope we are wrong, but we sincerely believe America is in trouble. And if America is in trouble, the world is in trouble. One of the bigger problems in the world today is the rising price of oil. Oil is the blood of the world's economy. If the price of oil gets too high, and we do not find a better alternative to oil soon, the world economy will begin to die. If oil goes over $100 a barrel, and I believe it will sometime in the near future, the economy will suffer. But you do not have to. You can face the problem now and be part of the solution. My rich dad taught me, soon after the first oil crisis in 1973-74, that oil and wealth were directly related. He would often say, wealth equals energy. Since I was an apprentice at Standard Oil on their tankers beginning in 1966, I had an interest in oil. Rich Dad's explanation was a simple one. He said, when the price of energy goes down, our wealth goes up. And for most people, when the price of energy goes up, our wealth goes down. The year 1974, the same year I started my business career as a brand new Xerox sales rep, proved my rich dad's theory correct. In 1974, high oil prices had caused the economy to contract. People were not renting Xerox copiers. Instead, they were canceling their rental contracts. My first sale as a new rep found me on my knees in front of the customer, begging him not to cancel his rental agreement. Instead of making money the first 2 years, I owed Xerox money. I owed the company money because every time a customer canceled a machine, the commission that was paid to the sales rep who sold the machine was charged back to the sales rep who lost the machine. I was not selling, I was starving, and I was nearly fired several times during those 2 years. The good news was, the challenge of a contracting economy actually made me a better salesman. Even though I did not make much money back then, my sales training still pays off today. My businesses are successful because I can sell, and because I understand the importance of sales and marketing. In tough economic times, that can give you an edge. As Donald Trump and I often say, if you are in business, you need to learn how to sell. Since oil was in short supply, my rich dad suggested I learn more about the oil industry. I took a part-time position with an oil company out of Oklahoma that was selling oil and gas tax shelters. Back in those days, an investor could invest $100,000 and receive a 4-to-1 tax break on his or her investment. That means a $100,000 investment was worth $400,000 in tax write-offs. So the investor made more money from the oil production and paid much less in taxes. One reason why the rich got richer. Selling these leveraged oil and gas tax shelters during this period of high oil prices taught me some important lessons. Lesson number one was that not all businesses were hurting because of the oil crisis. My eyes were open to the reality that many people were getting richer and richer while others were getting poorer. With that realization, my financial IQ went up. I saw another world. After my experience selling Xerox copiers to businesses and then selling tax shelters to the rich in my spare time, I decided I wanted to be rich. The harsh reality is, as energy prices go up, the wealth of the nation goes down, except for those with the financial IQ to invest wisely. Yet, if you are rich, your equation can look like this. As energy prices go up, your wealth goes up as well. The choice is yours. You can choose which wealth equals energy equation you want.
Donald's view. Education replaces fear.
Robert's and my message is, with the proper financial education and planning, you can ride out the turbulence of what is happening in our financial world today, and through this education, you can become richer by finding ways to solve the problems. One thing we all need to remember is that a little effort is the best replacement for excuses. If we were all to make an effort to understand what's going on around us, to make that quantum leap to using our higher, non-complacent minds, some lucid thinking might result. Problem solving is education at its best. Just as understanding can replace hatred, education can replace fear. Ignorance can be easier, but it's often the result of fear. As Robert Frost said, there's nothing I'm afraid of like scared people. Reduce your fear and fuel your courage. When I hear Robert's energy equations, I think of how our individual energy can create wealth. If you have the perseverance to move forward with momentum, that is a great force of energy in itself. And with the right focus, it's likely you will succeed. I always liked Alexander Graham Bell's statement, "Concentrate all your thoughts upon the work at hand. The sun's rays do not burn until brought to a focus." If you can control your energy, then you stand a good chance of creating and controlling your own wealth. I have learned that what is essential can sometimes be invisible to the eye. That's where discernment comes in. Leaders are those people who have replaced fear with discernment, which means they can predict the inevitable. Their education has resulted in an insight that can effectively replace fear and which greatly enhances their chances of success. Robert has said that a problem can create an opportunity. Well said, and I agree. If you will begin to view your problems in that light, I can guarantee you will be on the road to solving them. I've had some big problems, to the tune of billions of dollars of debt, but I never went bankrupt, and I'm more successful today than ever before. So I am speaking from experience. Trump Tower has been on the map as a destination site for so long now that people forget that it didn't just appear one day on the skyline of Manhattan. I had a lot of obstacles to consider and overcome when I decided I wanted the Tiffany location for my new building. I had to solve a lot of problems. First, I wanted to buy the Bonwit Teller store and building, but they thought I was crazy. I didn't give up, but it was 3 years before I got anywhere with them. Then, I wanted to buy the air rights above Tiffany's. Purchasing those rights would give me the ability to build a much bigger building. Once I got those rights, I still needed a tiny parcel of land that was critical because of zoning laws that required a minimum of 30 feet of open space behind any building. That took more investigating and negotiating. In addition, my architect, Dare Scoot, and I went over at least 4 dozen designs, finding the best elements of each and incorporating them into the final design. Then we had to have the final design approved by the city and get zoning variances. That's just part of the story of Trump Tower. None of those steps were easy, but I saw each step as a challenge, and enjoyed working out the details. If I didn't see it that way, it could have been very easy to become discouraged. But instead, I have a beautiful building that has become world famous. Was it worth it? Yes, and it's a great example of problem solving. Robert and I realize that problems can be complex and at times seemingly endless, but we want to encourage you to see them as challenges that will give you a chance for great achievement. Remember, nothing is easy, but who wants nothing? Your financial intelligence is greater than that.
Chapter 5. Why we want you to be rich. Robert's view.
When Charles Wilson, then president of General Motors, was appointed Secretary of Defense in 1953, he was asked if he could make decisions that would adversely impact GM. He said he could, but that he couldn't conceive of a situation where that would happen, because for years I thought what was good for the country was good for General Motors, and vice versa. What he meant was that the two giants, GM and the United States, were intertwined. That is true today as well, though not in the same way it was back then. General Motors is in trouble, and so is the United States. GM's problems stem from the fact that its cars are not as good as they need to be, and the company has had management problems for years, and like the United States, has lived on its past successes, pushing problems forward rather than solving them. An example of how poorly managed GM was comes from the book Buffettology. According to Mary Buffett, between the beginning of 1985 and the end of 1994, GM earned in total approximately $17.92 a share and paid out in dividends approximately $20.62 a share. During this same time period, the company spent approximately $102.34 a share on capital improvements. This little example does not take into account GM's loss of market share, the number of employees who are not working, yet are being paid, an underfunded pension plan, and medical liabilities. In other words, just like the United States, the biggest car maker in the world is teetering on the edge of bankruptcy. Yet even though it does not make sense, millions of people are investing in GM, betting their retirement on GM's future, and listening to stockbrokers and financial planners who advise them to invest in blue-chip companies like GM. How can people be so naive? My answer? No financial education. Warren Buffett may have another answer to that question. A quote, "It has been helpful to me to have tens of thousands of students turned out of business schools taught that it didn't do any good to think." And that brings up another quote from Mr. Buffett that seems appropriate. Wall Street is the only place that people ride to in a Rolls-Royce to get advice from those who take the subway. Donald Trump and I are very concerned about the future of this country. We know something is wrong, just as we all know something more than the cars is wrong at GM. We are afraid this country and its wealth have been grossly mismanaged, just as GM is mismanaged. While playing games with the numbers actually benefits the rich, making them richer, the price is paid by the poor and the middle class. If you have been to Detroit recently, you know the place feels like a funeral home. Towns and businesses are dying. As businesses die, real estate prices drop, and families are hurt in more ways than just financially. So is what is good for GM also good for America? Is Detroit an example of the future America? Donald and I both agree that America has become complacent. This does not mean people do not work hard. What we mean by complacent is that people have come to expect the government to handle their problems, to fix the future. As a nation, we have come to put too much faith in politicians and bureaucrats. Many problems today cannot be solved by government, because these problems are beyond any government's power to solve. This is a global truth. This complacency includes the rich. Many big corporations are subsidized by the government. Many farms and ranches would not survive without a government handout. When it comes to retirement benefits, the President of the United States and members of the House and Senate all expect retirement money from the government. So when I speak of the entitlement mentality, I am not speaking only of poor people. In reality, there are more government dollars going to rich people than to poor people.